I always imagined my son's wedding would be one of the proudest days of my life. As I pulled up to the grand old church, my hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from nerves about seeing my ex-husband and his new wife, but from the hope that, just for today, I could be the mother my son deserved. I'd spent weeks picking out the perfect dress, something elegant but understated, and rehearsing what I'd say if anyone asked about my life. I wanted to look strong, even if I felt anything but. Walking up the steps alone, I could feel the eyes on me, some curious, some pitying, a few even cold. I tried to focus on the joy of the occasion, reminding myself that this day was about my son, not the past. The laughter and music spilling from the reception hall should have been comforting, but instead they made me feel like an outsider peering in through a window. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and told myself I belonged here. After all, I'd raised him. I'd been there for every scraped knee, every late-night fever, every heartbreak. No one could take that from me. But as I stepped inside, the air seemed to shift. I caught a glimpse of my ex-husband's new family, polished, perfect, and all. Together, my heart pounded as I searched for my place at the table, desperate for a sign that I was welcome. That's when I saw it. A small white nameplate set apart from the others. My name, and beneath it, 2 words that would change everything. I blinked, certain I was seeing things. But no, there it was, clear as day. Charity case. And in that moment, I realized this day would be nothing like I'd hoped. If you'd asked me 20 years ago what my life would look like, I never would have pictured myself as a single mom. Back then, I was just a young woman in love, full of dreams and plans for a happy family. My ex-husband and I met in college, and for a while, it felt like we were building something Ryla partnership, a future. But life has a way of unraveling even the best-laid plans. The cracks started small. Late nights at work, missed anniversaries, arguments that never really ended. By the time our son was 5, I was sleeping alone more nights than not, and the silence in our house was louder than any fight. When the divorce papers came, I felt like I was drowning. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor, clutching a mug of cold coffee, wondering how I'd ever make it on my own. But then I looked at my son, just a little boy with big brown eyes and a mop of unruly hair. I knew I had to find a way. He became my reason for everything. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. There were nights I'd come home so exhausted I could barely stand, but I'd still read him his favorite bedtime story just to see him smile. Our bond was forged in those hard years. We didn't have much, but we had each other. I was there for every school play, every science fair, every scraped knee and broken heart. I cheered the loudest at his soccer games, even when the other parents whispered about my hand-me-down clothes or the old car I drove. I learned to ignore the looks, the pity, the subtle reminders that I didn't quite fit in with the other moms. My son never seemed to notice. To him, I was just mom, the one who made pancakes on Saturdays and stayed up late helping with homework. But as he grew older, things got more complicated. My ex-husband remarried a woman named Linda, who seemed to have it all together: perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect life. They moved into a big house in the suburbs, hosted elaborate holiday parties, and posted family photos that looked like something out of a magazine. My son would come home from weekends with them, talking about new gadgets, fancy vacations, and the fun things they did together. I tried not to let it sting, but sometimes it did. I worried he'd start to see me as less than, that he'd compare our simple life to theirs and find me lacking. Still, I did my best to keep our connection strong. I listened when he needed to talk, gave advice when he asked, and tried to support his dreams even when it meant making sacrifices I could barely afford. I never wanted him to feel like he was missing out because of me. But the truth is, I always felt like I was walking a tightrope, trying to be enough, to do enough, to prove that I was worthy of being his mother. The wedding invitation felt like a test I desperately wanted to pass. I told myself it was a sign that despite everything, my son still wanted me in his life. But beneath the excitement, there was a knot of anxiety I couldn't shake. I knew I'd be walking into a room full of people who saw me as the other parent, the one who didn't quite measure up. I just hoped, for my son's sake, that I could hold my head high and show him that love real, messy, unconditional love was enough. But as the big day approached, couldn't help but wonder if I was fooling myself. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of phone calls, emails, and awkward conversations. I wanted to be involved to help with the planning, but every time I offered, Linda would politely brush me off. "Oh, don't worry, we've got it covered," she'd say, her voice syrupy, sweet. "You just focus on finding something nice to wear." It was always the same smiles in public, but a wall I couldn't get past. I tried to tell myself it was just nerves, that maybe she was overwhelmed, but deep down I knew I was being kept at arm's length. At the bridal shower, I sat at the edge of the room, clutching a cup of lukewarm tea, watching Linda's friends laugh and swap stories. When I tried to join in, the conversation would shift, as if I'd interrupted something. "Private." "Oh, you wouldn't know about that, would you?" one of Linda's sisters said when I asked about the caterer. The words stung, but I forced a smile and nodded, pretending not to notice the sideways glances. My son was busy helping his fiancée with decorations, and I didn't want to burden him with my feelings. I told myself I was just being sensitive, that it was all in my head. But the little things kept piling up. The group text for wedding updates somehow never included me. When I asked about the rehearsal dinner, Linda said, "It's mostly just for family, but you're welcome to come if you want." I bit my tongue, swallowing the hurt. Wasn't I family? I tried to focus on my son, on how happy he seemed. But every interaction with Linda's side of the family left me feeling smaller, less important. One afternoon, I stopped by the venue to drop off a gift for the couple. Linda met me at the door, her smile tight. "Oh, you didn't have to do that," she said, taking the box from my hands. "We're trying to keep things simple, you know. Not everyone can afford to go overboard." The implication hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. I wanted to snap back, to remind her that I'd given everything I had for my son. But instead, I just nodded and left, my cheeks burning. Even my ex-husband seemed different. He was always polite but distant, as if he was afraid to be seen talking to me for too long. At the rehearsal, he barely met my eyes, focusing instead on Linda and her children. When I tried to talk to him about the seating arrangements, he waved me off. "Linda's handling all that. She's really good at this stuff." I felt invisible, like a ghost haunting the edges of my own family. The night before the wedding, I called my son, hoping for reassurance. "Are you excited?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He sounded tired, distracted. "Yeah, Mom, it's just a lot. Linda's family is kind of intense, but I'm glad you'll be there." I wanted to tell him how I was feeling, how out of place I felt, but I didn't want to add to his stress. Instead, I told him I loved him and that I couldn't wait to see him at the altar. After I hung up, I sat in the dark, staring at the dress I'd picked out weeks ago. I wondered if I should even go. Would anyone notice if I wasn't there? Would my absence make things easier for everyone? But then I remembered all the years I'd spent fighting for my place in his life, all the sacrifices I'd made. I wasn't going to let anyone take this moment from me, not Linda, not my ex-husband, not anyone. Asterisk still. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me at that wedding, something I wasn't prepared for. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just tired. But deep down, I knew the worst was yet to come. The morning of the wedding, I woke before dawn, my heart pounding with a mix of nerves and hope. I wanted everything to be perfect for my son. I took extra care getting ready, smoothing my hair, checking my makeup, and slipping into the dress I'd chosen with so much thought. As I looked in the mirror, I tried to see myself the way I hoped my son would see me, proud, dignified, and full of love. I whispered a silent prayer that today would be about him, about us, about the years we'd survived together. The church was already buzzing when I arrived. I could hear laughter and music drifting out onto the steps, and for a moment I let myself believe I belonged. I walked inside, clutching my small purse, and was greeted by a flurry of faces, some familiar, some not. Linda's family was everywhere, their voices loud and confident, their smiles practiced. I caught sight of my ex-husband, arm in arm with Linda, both of them looking every bit the picture-perfect couple. He nodded at me, a quick, impersonal gesture before turning away. I searched for my son, but he was nowhere to be seen. Instead, I was ushered toward the reception hall by one of Linda's sisters, who barely looked at me as she pointed out the seating chart. "You're over there," she said, waving vaguely toward the back of the room. I made my way through the crowd, my heart thumping, scanning the tables for my name. I passed table after table, each one decorated with elegant centerpieces and gold-rimmed name cards. I saw Linda's parents, her siblings, even distant cousins, all seated together, laughing and chatting as if they'd known each other forever. Finally, I found my table tucked away in a corner, far from the head table, far from my son. There were only a few seats, and none of the names were familiar. I felt a pang of disappointment, but I told myself it didn't matter. I was here for my son, not for anyone else. I looked down at the nameplate in front of me, expecting to see my name written in the same elegant script as the others. But what I saw made my breath catch in my throat. There, in bold black letters, was my name. And underneath, in smaller print, 2 words that felt like a slap across the face. Charity case. For a moment, I thought I must be imagining it. I blinked, my eyes stinging, but the words didn't change. Charity case. My cheeks burned as I looked around, hoping no one else had noticed. But I could feel eyes on me, some curious, some pitying, a few even smirking. I heard a whisper from the next table. "Is that really what it says?" Followed by a stifled laugh. I wanted to disappear, wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to tear the nameplate in half and throw it across the room. But I couldn't move. I stood there, frozen, my hands shaking, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. I tried to tell myself it was a mistake, a cruel joke, but deep down I knew it wasn't. This was deliberate, was meant to put me in my place, to remind everyone exactly who I wasn't. I looked for my son, desperate for his face, for some sign that he saw me, that he cared, but he was still nowhere to be found. My ex-husband and Linda were laughing with their friends, oblivious or maybe not. I felt utterly alone, more isolated than I'd ever felt in my life. The years of struggle, the sacrifices, the love I'd poured into my son, all of it reduced to a punchline at his wedding. Something inside me broke. I couldn't stay, not like this. I picked up my purse, fighting back tears, and walked out of the hall. As I stepped into the cool air outside, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with heartbreak. I didn't know what would happen next, how my son would react, what people would say, or how I would face tomorrow. But I knew one thing. I couldn't let anyone, not even my own family, define my worth. And as I walked away from the laughter and music, I realized that leaving might be the bravest thing I'd ever done. I didn't make it far before the tears came. I ducked behind a row of parked cars, pressing my back against the cool metal, trying to steady my breath. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone, desperate for something, anything to anchor me. I wanted to call my son, to hear his voice, to ask him if he knew, if he understood what had just happened. But I couldn't bring myself to dial. What would I even say? That his mother, the woman who raised him, had been reduced to a joke at his own wedding. I wiped my eyes and tried to collect myself, but the humiliation clung to me like a second skin. I could still hear the laughter, the whispers, the way people had looked at me as I left. I wondered what they were saying now. Maybe they thought I was being dramatic, that I couldn't handle a little teasing. Maybe they didn't care at all. I imagined Linda triumphant, and my ex-husband relieved that I was gone. The thought made my stomach twist. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was my son. I hesitated, staring at the screen, my thumb hovering over the answer button. Finally, I picked up. His voice was frantic, confused. "Mom, where are you? People are asking where you went. Are you okay?" I tried to steady my voice, but it cracked anyway. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I couldn't stay." There was a pause, heavy and uncertain. Did something happen? Was it Dad or Linda? I wanted to tell him everything, to pour out all the pain and anger and shame, but I couldn't bring myself to ruin his day. "It's nothing," I lied. "I just needed some air." He didn't sound convinced. "Mom, please come back." I want you here." His words were a bomb and a blade all at once. I wanted nothing more than to run back inside to pretend none of this had happened. But I couldn't. Not after what they'd done. "I love you," I whispered, "but I can't. Not right now." I heard him sigh, frustrated and hurt. "Don't understand. Why are you doing this?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his disappointment. "Someday, maybe you will." After I hung up, I sat in silence, watching as guests drifted in and out of the hall, their laughter echoing across the parking lot. I wondered if anyone even noticed I was gone. I pictured Linda explaining my absence with a shrug, maybe even a joke. My ex-husband would probably say I was always too sensitive, too emotional. I could almost hear his voice. "She's always been like this. You know how she is." The public story would be simple and overreacting ex-wife, a mother, who couldn't handle her son growing up. But the private truth was so much messier. Inside, I was unraveling. Every memory of raising my son, every sacrifice, every moment of pride and pain felt tainted by that nameplate. I wondered if I'd failed him, if I'd failed myself. Was I really just a charity case in their eyes? Had all my efforts, all my love, meant nothing? The questions circled endlessly, each one cutting deeper than the last. I thought about going back in, about demanding an apology, about making a scene, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. The damage was done. The people inside would go on celebrating, oblivious to the storm raging just outside their perfect little world. I was alone, not just in the parking lot, but in the story of my own life. As the sun began to set, I realized I had a choice. I could let this moment define me, or I could find a way to move forward. I didn't know what that would look like yet, or how I would ever face my son again. But I knew I couldn't go back, not to the wedding, not to the role they'd written for me. I had to find my own way, even if it meant walking away from everything I thought I knew. And as I sat there, heartbroken and raw, I wondered if this was the beginning of something new or just the end of everything I'd ever loved. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that nameplate, those two words burning into my memory. I replayed the day over and over, wondering if I could have done something differently, if I should have stayed and fought for my place. But as the hours dragged on, something inside me shifted. I realized I was tired of apologizing for, who I was tired of shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. I'd spent years trying to prove my worth to people who had already made up their minds about me. Maybe it was time to stop. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, letting the quiet settle around me. For the first time in a long time, I asked myself what I needed, not what my son needed, not what my ex-husband or Linda expected, but what I truly wanted for myself. The answer was simple: respect. I wanted to be treated with dignity, not as an afterthought or a burden. I wanted my son to see me standing tall, not shrinking away. I decided I couldn't let what happened at the wedding go unaddressed. I owed it to myself and to my son to speak my truth. I sent him a message asking if we could meet, just the two of us. When we sat down together a few days later, I could see the worry in his eyes. "Mom, I still don't understand why you left," he said quietly. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "I left because I was humiliated, and I couldn't let anyone treat me that way, not even for you. I love you more than anything, but I have to love myself too." He looked away, struggling to process my words. "Did Dad or Linda do something?" I nodded. "It doesn't matter who did it. What matters is that it happened, and I won't let it happen again. I need you to know that I deserve respect, just like anyone else." There was a long silence between us, heavy with things unsaid. I could see the conflict in his face, torn between loyalty to his new family and the mother who raised him. I didn't expect him to choose sides. I just wanted him to understand that I was done accepting less than I deserved. I told him I would always be there for him, but I wouldn't sacrifice my dignity for anyone, not anymore. As I spoke, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time, I was setting a boundary not just for others, but for myself. I could see the impact my words had on him, even if he couldn't say it yet. Maybe it would take time for him to understand, to see me not just as his mother, but as a person with her own needs and limits. I didn't know what the future would hold for us, but I knew this was a turning point. I was reclaiming my story, one painful step at a time. And as I walked away from that conversation, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. In the weeks that followed, life felt strangely quiet. There were no more frantic calls about wedding details, no more forced smiles at family gatherings. At first, the silence was painful, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. My son didn't reach out as much, and when he did, our conversations were careful, almost formal. I missed the easy closeness we once shared, the way he used to confide in me about everything from school to heartbreak. Now, there was a distance between us, space filled with things neither of us knew how to say. But as the days passed, I began to notice something else, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Without the constant pressure to prove myself, I had room to breathe. Started doing small things just for me, taking long walks in the park, reading novels I'd put off for years, even signing up for a pottery class at the community center. For the first time, I was living for myself, not just for someone else's approval. Setting boundaries wasn't easy. There were moments when I questioned everything, when the loneliness crept in, or when I saw photos of my son with his new family, all smiles and togetherness. I wondered if I'd made a mistake, if I'd chosen pride over love. But then I'd remember that day, the sting of humiliation, and I'd remind myself that self-respect isn't selfish. It's necessary. I realized that loving my son didn't mean letting others walk all over me. It meant showing him by example how to stand up for yourself even when it hurts. Slowly, things began to shift. My son started reaching out more, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to ask for advice. Our conversations were still tentative, but there was a new honesty between us. One afternoon, he called and said, "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said. I'm sorry for what happened. I should have noticed. I want you to know I love you and I'm proud of you." His words brought tears to my eyes, not just for the apology, but for the recognition I'd longed for. My relationship with my ex-husband and Linda remained distant, and I accepted that some wounds might never fully heal. But I no longer felt the need to chase their approval. I had my own life, my own worth, and that was enough. I even made new friends at the pottery class, women who understood what it meant to start over, to find strength in vulnerability. Looking back, I realized that walking away from that wedding wasn't just an act of defiance. It was an act of self-love. I'd lost something that day, but I'd gained something far more important: the courage to choose myself. And as I shaped clay with my hands, molding it into something new, I felt a quiet hope blooming inside me. Maybe this was just the beginning of a life I could finally call my own. Looking back, I realized that the pain of that day was a turning point, not just an ending. For so long, I measured my worth by how much I could give, how much I could endure, and how well I could fit into spaces that were never truly mine. But standing up for myself, walking away from humiliation, even when it meant stepping into the unknown, taught me that self-respect is not something anyone else can give or take away. It's something you claim for yourself, one difficult choice at a time. I learned that boundaries are not walls. They're bridges to a healthier, more honest life. By refusing to accept less than I deserved, I gave myself permission to heal, to grow, and to rediscover the parts of me I'd set aside for too long. My relationship with my son is still a work in progress, but it's built on a new foundation, one of mutual respect and understanding. I hope he sees now that loving someone sometimes means letting them see your strength, not just your sacrifice. If you're listening to my story and see yourself in these words, I want you to know you're not alone. You are not a charity case. You are worthy of love, dignity, and a place at the table on your own terms. Don't be afraid to set boundaries, to speak your truth, and to walk away from what no longer serves you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself. And if you think this is where my story ends, just wait. Life has a way of surprising us, and I've learned that every ending is just the start of something new. Stay with me, there's so much more to come.